Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Future of STEM Education, supporting continuous improvement in teaching and assessment, a Times Higher Education webinar brought to you in partnership with Digital Ed. My name is Alistair Lawrence. I'm the Special Projects Editor at Times Higher Education, and I'm joined today by a panel of experts from academia and industry. They are Guy Daly, who's Deputy Vice-Chancellor of Education and Students at Coventry University, Nikita Hari, who's Lecturer in Electronics at the Dyson Institute of Engineering and Technology, Louise Krompetic, who's Vice President of Enterprise Services at Digital Ed, Augusto Macalag, who is Associate Professor and Programme Director at the School of Education at Arcadia University, and David Rumsey, who is Associate Dean of Engineering and Computer Sciences at Indiana's Institute of Technology. If you do have a question for the panel during the course of today's event, please post it in the chat box in Zoom, and we'll do our best to answer as many as possible during the last 5 or 10 minutes of the session. So to begin, I'd like to note that STEM teaching, learning and assessment has become an increasingly important part of universities' digital transformation and also a larger global mission to enable upskilling and reskilling, as well as to increase access to higher education. With that in mind, I'd like to begin today's discussion about delivering continuous improvement by asking the panel what they think best practice is for choosing the modality of teaching courses. For example, when to teach face-to-face, when to teach hybrid, and when to teach fully online. Augusto, would you like to start us off?
Sure. And so as an educator, I feel like the answer to that question is depends on your objective. What is the objective of what you're trying to do in your lesson? So for instance, before the pandemic, if you want to have hands-on investigation, or if you ask teachers or kids to design a tower or investigate a bridge, typically we do that in person, right? So that they would do collaborative learning. However, what we learned from the pandemic is we could also do it online. So using breakout sessions. So for instance, a group of students designing a windmill, they are, one group will be testing, the material, another group will be testing the area, and then they will come back in the main room to share out their data. We were able to do that online. I mean, it's not that easy because, for instance, a kid, when I say kids, could be elementary students or middle school students, are struggling to design something. It's not like a teacher or a colleague of theirs, their classmates, can help them manipulate their materials. That is something that is still hard to do online, virtually, but we were able to do it online moving forward. And then also, and I'm sure a lot of people have been using simulations as part of investigations.
Great, thank you very much. Guy, I saw you nodding in agreement there. What form has this move to program-based learning and assessment taken at Coventry? I mean, was it something that was already in place and that you've scaled over the past year and a half, or is it something that's been completely rethought during lockdown?
I think it was something that we were moving to. We've had CU Online as our sort of our online entity for a while, and we've had a number of programs that we've developed as an online offer, and we've got a team of learning technologists and curators who have helped in terms of all this, as well as pedagogists, I suppose, in this space, who've been able to advise. But at the same time, I think if one is honest, that not many of us had thought through all of this in advance, etc. So there's been a lot of on-the-job thinking going on, and I think I was nodding particularly in terms of the answer as ever amongst a group of education is it depends, and it does depend. But I think it is also interesting that prior to the pandemic, I think many of us would have thought that whenever you're developing skills, particularly related to STEM subjects, at a higher education university level, but probably at any level, you've got to have sort of face-to-face group practical activities, etc. And I think to an extent that is still the case, but it does depend. And there are going to be opportunities that we've exploited whereby you're able to facilitate the development of those skills much more effectively online than you can face to face. You know, it can be more personalized. You can get feedback in terms of the individual and whether or not the learning is effective or not, informally and formally. We've seen come on stream a whole lot of different packages now that help us, whether that be biolabs, software, or sort of physical engineering subjects, etc., etc.
Great, thank you very much. Louise, can I come to you next? Just perhaps you tell us a little bit about how Digital Ed's been working with universities in order to sort of support those endeavours, and what are the changes you've been responding to in order to meet the needs of people for the best type of course delivery?
Yeah, and I think, you know, the it depends is the perfect answer, simply because it really does depend on the subject, what course you're teaching, your students that you're teaching, and your comfort level, both with the subject and with the technology and what's available. Digital Ed and the Mobius platform really allows educators to provide practice opportunities for students, algorithmic questions, so that they can practice until they feel comfortable, until they feel they have a level of mastery of a particular process that they're working on. And I think being able to include things like interactives and simulations, enabling students to get some of that exploration online that they used to do only in person, I think that will benefit not just the students who are online, but it can benefit everyone, because now students have an opportunity to go back and try it again, and to review concepts that maybe they may have forgotten about, or they just need a refresher on as well.
Great, thank you very much. David, can I come to you next, please? I just wondered, in a field such as engineering and computer science, do you see there's still potential for growth when we look at face-to-face learning and group learning in the way that other people on the panel are describing?
Yeah, well, this year, I mean, we've all obviously had challenges with COVID, but even prior to COVID, we had been examining how to adapt programs like electrical engineering technology, for instance, to an online platform. And that right there in itself creates a problem, because, you know, anytime you go into one of these engineering fields, you're feeling like, well, there's the laboratory experience, which is a critical part of the student experience, not just from interacting in a group, but, you know, being shown how to use equipment is different than actually using the equipment itself. So for the electrical engineering technology program, what we actually were able to do is we put together a small electronics kit that includes all of the basic components that you would need, so that every student at home has their own little circuits lab that they can do. And then in the online environment, we still pair them off in groups so that each student will get their own set of data, but then they compare it with another student that we partner them up with, and having the breakout rooms so they can still get that hands-on experience. In fact, they're in some cases getting more hands-on experience with the equipment than they would face-to-face, because they have to do everything. They don't have a lab partner there. They can compare data and talk to each other, but they still ultimately in the end have to do everything. Now that doesn't work for everything, because we're looking at mechanical engineering technology, and the actual size of the equipment prohibits some of those things. So we've looked into how we can do simulations as one, but then we're also looking at something that our PhD program already does, which is that we have immersion weekends, where we, instead of having them every week have to do a lab of some sort, we have a weekend where they come in and we basically spend all day Saturday with the students working with the equipment on campus. That also brings other challenges as well. And then as far as how we've kind of worked it with COVID going on, we've recognized the need to being able to have our classes both in person and stream live simultaneously. So that's actually something our university is investing in, is that we will have the ability to stream live both in person and online. So
Great, thank you. So that's good. fairly comprehensive set of solutions that you're trying to implement. Nikita, can I ask what the personalized learning setup is at the Dyson Institute? I mean, how have you changed things? What have you found to be most effective?
So Dyson Institute of Engineering and Technology is relatively new, even though we were around for 4 years. We were teaching with Warwick University. So whilst COVID happened, it was Warwick as the manufacturing group there who took up the responsibility, because that was, they were handling teaching. But moving forward, now that we have the degree awarding powers and we are going to have our first cohort from September 21, our teaching methodology is based very much a hybrid. So even though we are proponents of in-class teaching, and I feel like teaching is definitely a human endeavor and not just an algorithm that we can replace. Having said that, what we are trying to do is that with the advent of digital tools and technologies, interactive learning, just like Guy pointed out, it opens up a plethora of whole new level of engagement that's possible with these edtech platforms such as digital ed, in terms of delivering, recording, interacting, expanding knowledge, basically complementing the classroom with resources that can be created with these platforms, and opening up these doors where you have where you go from teaching to learning, giving students that control over their learning journey, with access to resources that can be recycled, reused, and so on and so forth. So moving forward, we will be focusing on hybrid learning. And as an educator, I think what makes online education a tick is the fact that we need to be very aware of the shift in the faculty role. When we move online, it moves more towards mentoring and coaching and like creating and curating online learning experiences and facilitating those interactions. So enabling the students to do more thinking, writing, reflecting, interacting with their peers to improve their engagement and learning, so that students, like I said, can take more responsibility for their learning journey. And I think that is what we are looking to create at the Institute.
Great, thank you very much. I mean, that brings us on nicely to the next topic I wanted to cover, which is implementing interactive learning and assessment, both in person and digitally. Augusta, your research very much focuses on future models for teaching STEM and how curriculum and teaching methods can be updated to support, what are a very in-demand set of skills and what can be highly technical and specialized subjects, which aren't always the easiest ones to move online, as David mentioned. So in terms of getting the interactivity right, is it a case of building out more scope for mentoring, like Nikita says? I mean, is it group work? I mean, how is the assessment perhaps going to be changed and modified in order to really help students personalize, but also help boost their levels of attainment?
So I think I really agree. It will be a variety because it really depends on the learner. So like what David said, I have learners, so we would ship materials as well. So there are learners who would like to do with manipulations like circuits, let's say. They would play with circuits. But there are learners who would like to use simulations, because sometimes when you give them a circuit, you are not there to help them, to point out to them what mistakes they're doing. And it's hard for them, like physically, to see what they're doing wrong. Compared to simulations, oftentimes simulations are controlled environment. So they could easily manipulate and see from online how their charges are moving, how are they connected, what is not working, why is it not working. The other thing that we're finding that is really important is students are connected to other students, not within only the classroom, within the university, but also outside. So right now, my teachers are connecting with the teachers, for instance, from Pennsylvania and Texas, because I have another colleague in there. So the classroom environment now is not limited to my physical classroom. They are now experiencing, like, for instance, the challenges that my teachers are experiencing in Pennsylvania. They're finding it's similar challenges that teachers in Texas or California are also experiencing. And they are learning that they could have some strategies that are similar that they could do and apply in their own setting.
Great, thank you. I mean, when we look at peer-based learning more broadly and in terms of how students are interacting with each other outside of just the classroom setting, is this something now where universities can build out a more comprehensive offering to make sure that students know that they are supportive, and you can perhaps catch at-risk students a bit earlier, or help with sort of certain interventions and personalization steps? I mean, guys, this is something that looking at Coventry when you look at the student journey holistically?
Yes, I think so. So I think there's a couple of things. One is, I suppose, when one's thinking of online learning, one often focuses on the teaching side of it, as it were, as opposed to not just the learning side, but also the support side, as it were, and the informal. So, I mean, I think there's a few things we've done there. We've invested in a new virtual learning platform, Aula, which is more about helping to facilitate sort of communities of learning rather than the previous platform that we were using, which was a bit more probably hierarchical and one way, as it were. So it is more community based, such that as Augusta was talking, you get students talking to each other online and that sort of thing, and supporting each other to a much greater extent than would be the case if one was just, if you like, in a physical classroom and all that sort of stuff. And people can do it sort of where, when, and how they wish to. I think there's that. We've rolled out a mentoring program as well online. That's students in years 2 and year 3 in our language, supporting maybe first years. And also we're rolling out a student coaches side of things as well. And that again will be tech-based to an extent, and will be ones whereby there will be an element of push and pull, depending upon what the learner analytics are saying about a student's individual engagement. And that way, hopefully, we can be more personalized, and in terms of any sort of attainment gaps as well, we can be, I suppose, more focused and more bespoke to ensure that everybody is engaging. I think the last thing I would say, though, is that the main noise in the system that we found probably over the last 18 months or so, as far as students are concerned, has been less about the formal learning, etc., but it is the informal communities that, yes, to an extent, we've developed them and built them, and students have built them themselves. But I think there will always be a place for many students of wanting the face-to-face synchronous on-campus activity, but it's probably more the informal than it is the formal where that is demanded.
Thank you very much. Augusta, would you like to add to that point?
Yeah, I just want to add, and I agree with you, Guy, that it's becoming more personalized. And I think the question for us now is, how do we assess learning in a personalized level? Originally and traditionally, we have examinations, final exams, midterms, and we still have those right now that we were able to do in the COVID online environment, making it secure. But what we're also finding that there are many different types of assessments that we could do, like peer reviews that students are reviewing each other's work. We also have them doing their own presentations or curations and stuff. Digital badges that they will have, when they accomplish stuff, that they will get badges from the certificates that they get from the class. So we are now being creative in looking at their progress in our courses, in their programs, and etc.
Thank you, Augusta. Nikita, can I come to you next just to ask how is that personalized learning taking shape in terms of assessment at your institution?
Yeah, so since we are trying to reimagine engineering education, for us, what we are looking into is it basically boils down to what ways of thinking, practicing, or being engineers we want our students to be assessed on. And so generally, we are going for multiple points of assessment and focusing on timely and detailed feedback, which we think is key to learning and growing for students. So it's more like learning, reflecting, thinking, and developing and evolving as engineers. we want to focus on. So starting from the traditional summative and formative kind of assessment, including online discussion assessments, quizzes, peer reviews, like has been already mentioned, and open design projects. So we want to be able to bring that fusion of innovation, enterprise, and design thinking into the formal assessment structure as well. And I think as we move forward, we'll probably have a much structured process of assessment. So like other people have mentioned, I think assessment is critical because at the end of the day, it defines the culture of students. It all goes back to why are we doing what we are doing and how am I getting graded or whatsoever. So as much as we would love to move away from this traditional assessment model, we are also trying to see how best we can bridge that traditional with the open design collaborative projects that we want students to work on, so that they have a feel of working in real worlds. And how are we going to assess that engineering habits of mind as they try and learn to be good engineers. So I think these are things that will evolve at the Institute as we move along. But currently we are going for a mixed approach of traditional and open design projects for assignments.
Great, thank you, Nikita. David, I had another question about the field of computer science and engineering in particular, where given that it's a highly desirable skill, so graduate employability you would hope is not the same challenge that it might be with some other disciplines, is there still a need with the interactive element of what you're teaching students to build in the kind of soft skills that they will need in order to make them sort of truly employable, in order to make them better communicators and better critical thinkers and better team members and all the other things that occasionally it's cited as perhaps a problem if somebody's very strong in their discipline but doesn't perhaps have those supporting skills around it?
Well, just to address the soft skills, I can say from our advisory boards that consists of industry corporations, the number one thing they always say, it's the soft skills. And there's lots of good schools out there that provide the technical training that they need. And they really are looking towards the soft skills that are needed. And so what we try and do, and I think this is something that I would think everyone probably on this call tries to do with their courses, is we really try and incorporate the soft skills into the technical courses. Because when you separate them out and you have your soft skill courses, which are still important, don't get me wrong, you need to have some of those soft skill courses, like maybe the English courses that are not the technical courses, but that your students will take. They need to have those maybe in preparation, but to kind of separate them out, I think does a disservice to the student, because they're going to be using those soft skills in the actual technical environment. So they need things like the technical writing, the technical communication. In fact, in our online technical writing class, the first assignment they do is write a professional email, which sounds so simple. But we are amazed at that first assignment that we get back. The students, both 18 to 22-year-old students and also returning adult students, that just do not know how to write a professional email to colleagues within a business. And so those soft skills, in my opinion, are critical. And so we try to interweave them in all of our courses so that we don't just have them in an isolated vacuum. And that can be done, as I said, through projects where they have to present to each other. It can just even be through email communications to each other. The peer reviews actually help develop soft skills. There's a lot of easy things to incorporate into technical classes. One thing that we've even incorporated into some of our math classes, and it actually kind of tails on with the assessment pieces, we haven't really used it yet for true assessment, but we are thinking about doing is having a self-assessment. We have the students just say, how do you feel like you've achieved the course outcomes? Tell us what, almost this idea of self-grading, what do they feel like? How well do they feel they've gone through? And we've also noticed that helps build their soft skills as far as communication as well.
Great, thank you very much. Louise, can I come to you next just to get a little bit more insight in terms of the the platform that you create in order to help universities deliver these courses. I mean, obviously interactivity is an existing part of the platform, and it's very important, I know. The type of challenges around assessment and personalized learning, have they been, how have you been interweaving those into what you offer?
Yeah, the Mobius platform has really been developed with STEM in mind. So it has a mathematical engine underneath, so you can actually ask the questions that you want to ask and grade them, automatically grade them with mathematical equivalency. So that really helps in terms of being able to ask authentic assessment in these disciplines and to ask real world type problems that students can then see how it's going to apply when they're, in their discipline. So I think that that's extremely important. I think also being able to give students immediate feedback. So as they're learning concepts and they're practicing and they're trying things, getting them feedback right away so that they can see, did they get that right? If they got it wrong, well, where did they miss, where was the misunderstanding? And then their interactions with their instructors can be so much more directed in terms of, this is where, like, I don't understand this step. I don't understand how this particular thing worked, or what was I missing? So I think those are a couple of key things. And the other aspect is, of course, the analytics, as Guy talked about, being able to look at the student results and see how are students doing? How are they engaged? How are they interacting with the different elements? Where are they spending their time? Because that allows, as an instructor, allows you to look at your course and say, okay, are there pieces here that I need to look at? Are there things that I need to add some additional information to? Or are there pieces that maybe we need to cover when we are face to face so that we can really talk about those specific aspects?
Great, thank you. I wanted to move on to the next point we have for discussion, which is what positive effects there are of the mass shift to online, and how those can be maximized to make digital STEM education more robust and also increase access, because while there's a demand that needs to be met, it's also important that staff and students feel fully supported when they are doing teaching and learning online. Guy, you mentioned that you've brought on some different digital platforms in Coventry at the past few months. I mean, is there an ambition now to scale and offer different types of curricula that will allow you to be more flexible in terms of what you offer to different types of learners in future?
I think our challenge at the moment is really about thinking, which courses, which programs will continue to be delivered in the, I suppose, the old way, the old platforms, face-to-face mainly, and all that sort of stuff, campus based. Which ones can be sort of a hybrid, and which ones can be fully online, and so which is appropriate for which course, as it were, and also relatedly, where is the demand, as it were. So strategically, we may think, oh, we should switch everything to online, but actually, if there isn't a great deal of demand for it, then sort of, why do it, as it were. And you could argue that I think on an individual institutional basis, then I think one of the philosophical things really is about the extent to which it's appropriate for the institution that we happen to be in to do that. But at the same time, I think one balances that by saying that there is a greater expectation from all of us, students and academics and others, to do more and more learning and teaching through online delivery. So none of us think that we will go back totally to the old ways, as it were, post-pandemic and all that sort of thing. So I think that's in part what we're looking at. That's all a bit general and waffly, so I apologize. So maybe specifically, though I think there's a truck just driving past me. It must be chasing, I think it's chasing your ambulance, Addison.
Yeah, I had the siren a minute ago, so yeah, you're right.
But I think we'll, where are we? So I think we we are rolling out a number of packages, not just the virtual learning environment, which is more community based, but also in terms of our library has moved online, as it were. So all of the resources that students will need they can now access online. Student support. I think one of the things we've not discussed so far today is sort of induction and pre-induction. So, you know, we were either lucky or foresightful that we did move our induction for new students to be an online delivered entity, both pre actually arriving and then once students have arrived as well. So I think that's another thing that we've done. And then also we've mentioned assessment. So we've been piloting a couple of online assessment packages and seeing which would be the best for us. And then I think, like others have said, you know, through necessity, Augusta I think was mentioning, we moved all of our exams to being fully online during this period, and we have no intention of rolling back to rehiring the gymnasium for 200 people to take an exam all at the same time. You know, sort of the only caveat I think to that one is other colleagues have mentioned their advisory boards and their stakeholders. You know, we do have what we described as professional statutory body requirements. So there are certain professional regulators that say you must do this in a particular way, and unless we can persuade them otherwise, there is a danger that we will still have to do things in the old-fashioned way for some respects.
Okay, great. Thanks, guys. Good to have that overview of various issues that you're grappling with. Augusta, to that point, I was just wondering, across your research so far, you said obviously you're highly collaborative and you're speaking to people in different parts of the country and different types of cohorts. Are there any patterns emerging in terms of building learning communities effectively that enable you to bring in a more diverse group of learners, people who are learning at different stages in life, who are interested in upskilling and reskilling, or just generally increasing access to people who may not be able to go through the traditional routes? Yeah,
so to answer that question, I want to also connect to what Louise and others and on the Q&A mentioned. It's the interdisciplinary integration of STEM learning. I think we're moving in a way that a lot of learners are now interested into a context-based or problem-based learning. So for instance, my teachers, instead of just learning, for example, about sugar in chemistry, we have a sugar tax in Pennsylvania, in Philadelphia. So thinking about sugar tax and how does it affect, learning in chemistry, in biology, but also the mathematics of tax, and then the society, the health, food access. We are now bringing different people together. And when I have projects, not only in Pennsylvania, I also have a project in Egypt. They're also grappling those kinds of issues, like, not only health, but also water quality. And because of that, we are bringing together different groups of educators, different groups of students from different parts, like engineers are interested in thinking about how to develop better ways to deliver and also access clean water, not only in Egypt, but also in the United States. And California has a drought, and when we do that, we tap into the different interests of students, different interests of professionals, and then we are better preparing our students into this real world challenge that we're facing.
Thank you, Augusta. To that point, I'd like to pick up with, David, you previously mentioned how you work with industry. I'll come to you in a moment if that's all right. But Nikita, I was just wondering, given that the institution is obviously born out of industry that you work for, how much do the local engagements and local learning communities, or even just specialized fields nationally, help you build connections and support STEM teaching and learning in different ways?
So I think when Dyson was initially designed, it was meant to be a bridge between industry and academia, trying to build that skill gap that especially UK is facing in terms of having real holistic engineers. So, like picking up on many of the things that different colleagues have already mentioned here, especially about the soft skills. So one of the fundamental things that we want to do is to integrate, and that's why I think we kind of like mentioned that we want to create engineering leaders, because it goes beyond just the technical expertise as an engineer, and looking at that multifaceted growth of engineers. So drawing on from the different expertise inside Dyson, from the engineering community of Dyson. And when the academic team was formed, it's relatively small, we just group of 5, which is gonna grow and evolve as we move along. There was a focus on recruiting people who were heavily invested and interested in pedagogy, teaching, as opposed to research. So how it has been formulated is that, unlike other traditional universities, we do not have this whole need to publish or perish. So there is a community that is being built around building up different pedagogical research in engineering and teaching and so on and so forth. And as far as the community building or the collaboration between different universities and so on, I think that's been very much evolving. Like I said, you know, we're just going to have the first batch up and running only in September 2021. So as individual academics, we are all trying to best understand how we forge the student journey from the workplace to academia to the professional development activities, which heavily focuses on the soft skills, so that we can give them the best student experience to become that engineer that we hope they would be.
Great, thank you very much, Nikita. David, can I come to you next, please? You mentioned about the stakeholders that you have on your advisory board that help you really sort of affirm the priorities around things like soft skills training and things like that. Is there a requirement, as places like cities look set to change massively over the next sort of 10 to 20 years, that the type of learning communities that people want to select from differs? You know, is there a call for greater diversity and increased access from the industry partners that you have? Are they looking at different types of people to hire rather than just the traditional maybe early 20s graduate that we think of?
Yeah, actually, we have a lot of industry that is looking at hiring people that are maybe doing a retraining or a second career. Part of the reason behind that is, you know, the 18 to 22-year-old, what they've discovered is that oftentimes is that, you know, they're not necessarily established in the area, and so they might only be able to maintain that particular individual for a year or two before they, you know, decide to move on for various reasons. Where someone who's in their mid-30s or even 40s who's getting a retraining is probably already living in the area when they're applying for the position. And for us, our retraining for the adult learners is done completely online. It's only our online programs that do that. And so with that, you know, the students are typically already in those areas. They might already be working a different job, but are looking to further their career. So there is a push amongst the industry to diversify, even for those quote entry-level positions, on who they hiring. That for those entry-level positions, it's not necessarily the 18 to 22-year-old that they're looking to hire. They're looking to hire all ages, to basically, again, kind of be able to keep them, because they don't want to put a year or two of training into them and then have them leave. They want to keep them there. So we definitely look into that when we are talking with our advisory boards.
Great, thank you very much. Louise, I was wondering what the implications are for online platform providers such as yourself. I mean, obviously it's important to be agile and for as many people to be able to use the platform as possible and use it as easily as possible. Further to David's point about how for postgraduate and retraining, it seems to be an exclusively online offering. Does that mean that there's a particular type of curriculum or a particular type of support that you have to give in order to help those learners get as much value out of using the platform as possible?
You know, I don't know that there is something different that you have to do. I think the key is making sure that the material that is available, whether you're face to face or online, is comparable, right? And will provide the same level of education for students who are whichever modality works for them. And a platform like Mobius allows instructors to create a course that can then be used in any modality, and students, wherever they are, you know, whatever they're doing, whenever they are able to access the material, can access it, can then use the interactive elements, can use the assessment aspects to really learn as they're going through the material.
Great, thank you. David, if I come to you next, then Guy after that, please. Oh, I think you might be on mute there.
Just to kind of go along with what Louise was saying here, we actually have incorporated Mobius into our math classes and have started to collect some anecdotal data. At this point, we are looking at going through our IRB to actually do a study of the data from our students. But what we've noticed is that as well as being able to develop the courses, is that we provided two different formats of the same information as far as for a lesson, because often people think with an online course, oh, we just make videos. And that's what students want. They just want the videos, and don't make them too long because they want a short video. Well, I was surprised because when we did the Mobius lessons, we actually used some of their content pack, which actually had both video and text base. And it was the exact same information. The video had the exact same information as the text. And we had a number of students who liked the fact that there was an option to either watch the video or read the text. And so there were some that preferred reading the text as opposed to watching a video. And again, I think that just goes into understanding how students learn in a different way. And honestly, one thing that we are working through here at our own university is understanding the difference between pedagogy and andragogy, because pedagogy is for the traditional 18 to 22-year-old student, where andragogy is really looking more at those adult students that are returning for retraining or for a new career option. So I think there's a lot of benefits with some of these online platforms and being able to address a diverse student body as far as what their needs are.
Great, thank you very much. Yeah, it's something that comes up again in terms of certainly how we communicate with our own audience at times higher, is just because you are perhaps reaching out to people who do a similar type of job or a similar, profession, it doesn't mean that their learning habits are going to be the same. And so by giving them options, you ultimately maximize your engagement that way. Guy, can I come to you next, and then Augusto after that, please?
Thanks. Well, I think that your last point, Alistair, relates to the first thing I was going to add, which was that we don't, in the same way as we can also speak English and maybe write an email, though I've yet to see substantial evidence in terms of that on occasion. But it doesn't necessarily mean we have the skills to write essays or to debate or whatever. In the same way, we know, irrespective of one's age, background, etc., one should never presume, first of all, that people come, if you like, fully equipped and all that, and that goes for the digital skills as well as the softer skills that we've been talking about. So we have been thinking about the extent to which not only will we be expecting all of our students to develop the softer skills, but also digital ones. I think I've said on a number of occasions internally, there used to be a requirement for social work programs to have for those students to complete something called the European Computer Driving License, and that was in the mid-1990s, I think, when that was being required. And I was saying, why do social workers need to do that? Well, someone had more foresight than me, I guess, in terms of all of that. A second one, if I may, is that what I've found over this last 18 months is that what we need to be ensuring is that we provide, if you like, that framework and structuring for people's learning. It's almost the nudging type stuff. So, there's a great anxiety that if everything goes online, that everybody will be doing it horizontally and all that sort of stuff, if at all. And the advent of when parents ask their student children, how many lectures have you got? Because that equals learning. It also means, well, thankfully they're getting up in the morning and they're going to the university and all that sort of stuff. So I think we need to just think about how we frame and nudge students learning, as it were, whether they be mature students or younger students. Last one for me is also there's an element of the ethics in terms of all of this, which I think we're aware of and that we're going to work through and all that sort of stuff. But in the same way as in our UK National Health Service, there's been a big debate about whether or not the NHS should have access to people's health data and everything. There's a benefit because it could lead to real advancements because you have an enormous data set. There's a worry in terms of personal freedom, liberty, and intrusion and all that sort of stuff. Same for all of this. As we're using students' data more and more, we've got to have a grown-up discussion about how that's done. Everybody is fully aware, people accept it, etc., etc. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Guy. Augusto?
Yeah, I just want to connect to what David said before, right? Allowing students to learn on their own pace and then what platform they want to do. And I want to connect to Nikita. What's one thing that we also do is reflections, right? Asking our students to reflect from the field, from their learning experiences. So traditionally, I always have been asking them to write the reflections. And because of this, having different platforms, I tried, similar to you, David, I tried to ask them, okay, if you don't want to write, why don't you give me a video of your reflections? Or you could also, we have like a conference, a mini conference at the end of the semester or mid-semester that you could present your learning experiences. And what I found, different students enjoy those. Some are continue to just write and finish their reflections. Others have videos. And to a point that I am tired and capped their video and said only 10 minutes because they love to explain what they learned from the field, on and on and on, even if after I gave them a guide questions. And then others enjoyed participating in a mini conference from other classes, learning from other people. So because of this, we were able to open our doors, our classroom doors, to different platforms, but to other learners as well.
Great, thank you very much. We've had about 150 people in the audience, so thank you all very much for joining us today. We've had a few questions come through. I know some of the panelists have kindly acknowledged them as we've gone. I was wondering if there's a couple that we could touch on. One person asked, what role do you think AI has in the future of assessment regarding the reduction of workload? This is obviously something that comes up time and time again, because as we start to offer learning and assessment in multiple ways, it would be remiss of us to not talk about the additional work that creates for university staff. Nikita, did you have any thoughts on this?
I think that this is a very controversial topic because Guy just touched upon ethics. And I think, the first thing that we have to be very aware when we are moving to use such technologies for assessment is that I do not see that it not happening in few years down the line, but I would not want to use that myself or advocate for using AI for assessing on a on a larger scale as of now, considering all the ethical dimensions that we have already been discussing with AI. But having said that, the tricky part behind these technologies is that one fine morning, there's some creative genius who will solve this issue. So if that's going to happen, definitely yes. But that will be more like, I would rather take the approach that the doctors would take when they want to use a robotic or AI surgery. You want to be able to do that in a hybrid fashion, overlooking what AI assessor would be doing it. For example, in my module, I would want to oversee that and not entirely rely on AI for doing the assessment. So that's my take, or that's my stand, where we think about completely, like using these technologies. So for me, technology as a teacher, technology is a tool and that enables me to take the right decisions for the students so that, you give them the best learning experience as possible and as fair and inclusive and diverse as it should be. So that would be my take on that.
Thank you, Nikita. Yeah, I mean, I think it's worth noting with AI as rudimental, I would suggest that it's governed by several big leaps forward that don't always happen at nice, neat intervals. So it's very difficult to know what to anticipate when you look at AI technology. Louise, we can come to you next, and then Augustus and Guy after that, please.
Yeah, no, I think in terms of AI, there's lots of possibility there in just in terms of not just doing the assessment in terms of grading a student's work using AI. There, I think there's lots of opportunity in terms of things like mathematical proofs and seeing the logical thought processes of students, and AI is going to be needed there in order to to take some of the manual grading and be able to do some type of automatic grading on that. But on the other side, there's also the AI that can be used as you have the analytics of how students are progressing through the course, of being able to provide a more personalized learning environment and being able to say to a student, hey, it looks like you're struggling with this part. Here's some additional resources that can help you out. And so I think that there are a lot of benefits in terms of AI that aren't necessarily on the ethical side of, what are we taking from it, but more what are we gaining and what are the students gaining from being able to implement some of these, the new functionality and new technology.
Okay, great. Thank you, Louise. It's interesting to hear your point of view as a platform provider in terms of what the practical applications have been so far. Augusto, can we come to you next, please?
No, Louise already mentioned what I'm going to say.
Okay. Oh, there you go. Great minds. Guy?
Ever so quickly, I'd say AI, amongst other advantages, a bit like in the health world, which I sort of occupy occasionally, is its accuracy potentially in comparison with the human fallibility that we all know occasionally pervades student assessment. And that relates to probably the assessment task being one that I've sometimes said we are probably moving to a post-Fordist situation of higher education, where we will see greater demarcation of roles and functions, as opposed to a notion that certainly an academic it should be able to do all of these things, and that's probably going to be less and less likely to be the case. And assessment is something that would probably be specialized, both in terms of the application of technology and also which individuals would oversee it.
Great, thank you. Nikita?
I just wanted to quickly echo what Louise was mentioning. Like, even though I touched upon, I think when I think about AI, it is because it is more from the aspect of super intelligent AI and all those ethical aspects of collusion, students cheating, and so on and so forth. But I'm very cognizant of the advantages in terms of especially like creating that personalized learning experience for students with both digital ed and with the reinforcement learning and so on and so forth. So I'm completely for such technologies. It is more on the lines of what Guy touched upon as well, when we talk about soft skills and integrating all this arts and humanities and all those aspects into the future of education. So is AI going to be equipped enough to be able to give that fair, equal, and equitable assessment across the different neurodiverse spectrum of students that we will be dealing with? So I think for me, that was what I wanted to clarify when I mentioned about the ethical aspects of AI. So it's how about, is that AI system going to have that inbuilt knowledge about the neurotypical versus neurodiverse and all those kinds of students and learners that we are dealing with.
Okay, thank you very much. David, I had a question about teaching of computer science and how that relates to AI, and this might be complete speculation on my part, but I was wondering if given students from that discipline will have an interest in this area and perhaps have a better understanding or knowledge of it than other students might, do you think that there might be a faster take up and a faster integration for teaching and assessment in those fields with an AI component, simply because students feel more comfortable with being graded that way or receiving nudge information that way?
Well, I think that's an interesting question. I think students may be more comfortable with that, but I would still say that the instructor, the professor, especially if they're the one teaching, they're going to know the fallacies of AI and be very cautious. And in some ways, I could see the CS people being the last adopters of it rather than the first adopters of it, because since they know all the intricacies of the technology, they are also very skeptical of what it can do as well.
So yeah, you may be its harshest critics. I did actually hear this from another STEM professor, where he said that he wouldn't like to move to a fully digitized mode of assessment for his students, because he knows that computer science students would be the most adept at circumventing any sort of checks and balances and anti-cheating measures that he wanted to put in place. But so it's always more complicated than you think. Guy, who'll come to you next, please? Oh, I think you're on mute.
A bit like the medics are the last people to give up smoking and drinking, sort of a thing. So yeah.
Okay, I think we've got time for one more question, and we did have a couple about interdisciplinary teaching and learning, and how particularly taking a STEM approach to things like applied mathematics or medicine or the arts, and how that might be more fully integrated going forward. I mean, Guy, I said you have some experience in the field of medicine. You say you occupy that space sometimes. Do you see the way in which STEM subjects is taught being more widely applicable now to a greater range of disciplines?
Absolutely, I think there's learning across. So not so much medicine, but certainly at Coventry, approximately 15 other sort of allied health professions, nurses, midwives, and yeah, we're rolling out the first fully online nursing degree for the Commissioner of Health Education in England. So I think we've used clinical simulation, as it were, simulating the workplace, and now we're using, if you like, virtual clinical simulation. So we've done that in terms of clinical skills, ward round, etc., etc. So yeah, I think that can be the case. And also, I think if you look at certain things like I don't know, anatomy and physiology, then in some ways the better way to try and understand all of that is virtually rather than practically. The days when a medical student would receive half a dead body and look after it and discover from it for their first 2 or 3 years are long gone, as it were. So I think yes, there are very much lessons that can move across ways of teaching and learning certainly from the health arena.
Great, thank you. I'm glad we managed to avoid mailing out dead bodies to students during lockdown. Louise, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I was going to add that I think the interdisciplinary approach, as we move things online, almost becomes easier, because now you have the ability to not just use a static textbook that is designed for teaching for example, a math subject, but now you can actually provide examples that fit within the discipline that you're currently teaching. And so you have that ability to sort of blur the lines a little bit, instead of it being a math course or a nursing course or an engineering course. You have that ability to bring in elements of other aspects of the learning journey for the student.
Great. Thank you. Guy, did you have something to add?
Just ever so quickly, if I can, now that Louise has prompted me. So I think a couple of things. At Coventry, for some time we've had sort of what we call online international learning, whereby students from different institutes from across the world will learn together. And the only way you can do that, or the most efficient way of doing that, is online, in terms of neither universities nor individual students can afford necessarily to travel and come together. So we've done that. Also, even within the institution, so we've got 3,000 health students all learning together. Part of what we wanted is for them to learn to develop as interprofessional practitioners, appreciating each other's skill-based values, etc., etc. And again, the only way you can do that really effectively is online. So we've been doing that for some time.
Great, thank you very much. Yeah, it does remind me of another discussion I had earlier in the year where somebody was talking about how international students who are accessing courses internationally are not trying to assimilate to the local culture of the university in quite the same way. So they are more vocal about giving examples of their own background and where they're from and how it's applicable and where they may move back, where they may have planned to move back to after they studied. And the great thing about it was that obviously the domestic students in those countries were really responsive and really interested in what they had to say because it broadened their knowledge and understanding of their field as well. There are lots more questions I would like to ask, but sadly that brings us up to the hour. So I'd like to thank all of our panel for joining us today and thank everybody in the audience for joining us too. There will be an on-demand version of this discussion available afterwards on the THE website, and it will also be a summary article of all the main points should you wish to share it with colleagues or revisit it at any stage. So I'd like to thank Guy, Louise, Augusto, David and Nikita for joining us today, and we hope to engage with you at future THE events. Thank you very much. Goodbye.